Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply solemn, absolutely critical topic. You see, by the mid-1800s, there was one single issue dividing the United States more than anything else, and that was slavery. Now, historians point out that this wasn't just some sudden debate that sprang up out of nowhere. It was a reality woven into the country from its very founding. And honestly, if we want to understand one of the most difficult and consequential periods in American history, understanding how slavery developed and why it became so deeply controversial is absolutely essential.
Which brings us to a pretty massive central question. How exactly did one issue divide a brand new nation so completely? We're going to explore how this profound contradiction, one that was sitting right there from the very days the nation was formed around ideals of liberty, escalated into a total, undeniable crisis. We'll trace the historical facts to see how a young country essentially found itself on a collision course with its own foundations.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, origins. Second, the economic divide. Third, the abolition movement. And finally, the political breaking point.
Let's start with Section 1, Origins, Slavery's Roots in America.
If we wind the clock back, historical records show that slavery actually existed in the American colonies starting in the early 1600s. A really pivotal moment to note here is 1619, which marks the first recorded arrival of enslaved Africans in Virginia. Over the next 2 centuries, right through the founding of the US in the late 1700s, the practice expanded significantly. By the early 1800s, it had grown incredibly vast, especially in the southern states, where it was just deeply, inextricably tied to agricultural economies, think cotton, tobacco, and rice. And it's important to remember that during the nation's founding, slavery was legally recognized and protected within the brand new framework of the United States.
Now, we have to be clear about the stark historical reality of this system. Enslaved people were legally stripped of all basic human rights right from the jump. Under this framework, individuals were legally denied the right to the fruits of their own labor, they were denied family stability, and they were denied personal freedom. This legal system of human bondage was literally the foundational reality that early American agricultural wealth in the South was built on.
Moving on to Section 2, the economic divide, North versus South.
By the time we hit the early 19th century, we are looking at a profound economic split. In the North, states had actually begun a process of gradual abolition within their own borders between the late 1700s and early 1800s. Their economies were just shifting in a totally different direction. Meanwhile, the southern states, they were doing the exact opposite. They were becoming increasingly deeply dependent on enslaved labor to fuel these massive agricultural plantations. So naturally, this growing economic divide fed right into deepening political and social fractures between the two regions.
And this economic divide was drastically accelerated by a single piece of technology in 1793, the cotton gin. This was a real game changer. It was a machine that dramatically sped up the process of removing seeds from cotton fiber. Because you could process cotton so much faster now, it became incredibly profitable. So this completely catalyzed the Southern economy, and tragically, it drastically increased the demand for enslaved labor to plant and harvest these massive new crops.
That brings us to Section 3, the resistance, the abolition movement.
So how did people fight back against this expanding system? Abolitionists used a really diverse set of organized methods on multiple fronts. They used writing and publishing to spread anti-slavery arguments as far as they could. They engaged in passionate public speaking to try and sway public opinion, and they formed highly organized resistance networks. The most notable of these, for sure, was the Underground Railroad. This was a secretive, incredibly dangerous network of safe houses and routes actively helping enslaved individuals escape to free states and to Canada.
Right at the forefront of this movement were leaders whose historical impact was absolutely profound. We're talking about vital figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. Because they were formerly enslaved themselves, they brought this undeniable first-hand testimony to the brutal realities of the system. Douglass became this towering intellectual, an incredible orator, and the author of a best-selling autobiography. Tubman, on the other hand, personally guided dozens of individuals to freedom over numerous highly dangerous trips on the Underground Railroad. Their leadership really brought an urgent, very human face to the whole abolitionist cause.
Now, here's a crucial bit of historical context we can't skip. Abolitionists' views were heavily debated nationwide. They were far from universally accepted, even in the North. Historical records show that Americans held a huge spectrum of views on this, yet some pushing for full, immediate abolition, others who favored a more gradual emancipation. Then you had people who preferred to just leave the system exactly as it was, and others who actively supported slavery's continuation and even wanted to expand it into new territories. It was a fiercely contested issue that permeated literally every layer of society.
Which leads us to our final chapter, Section 4, the political breaking point. While all this was happening, Congress repeatedly tried to politically balance the interests of the free enslaved states through major legislation. You've got the Missouri Compromise in 1820, and later the Compromise of 1850. But as historians note, these agreements were essentially just temporary band-aids. They managed to delay a total fracture for a little while, but they entirely failed to resolve the fundamental, underlying disagreement over the morality and economics of slavery.
And that brings us to a crucial, devastating turning point in 1857, the Supreme Court decision Dred Scott v. Sanford. The court ruled that enslaved individuals were not U.S. citizens and therefore had zero legal standing to sue for their freedom in federal court. On top of that, it essentially ruled that Congress couldn't even ban slavery in the territories. So rather than settling the debate, this landmark decision just massively intensified national tensions. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that these divides were completely unresolved.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. How could a nation divided so deeply possibly remain united? Slavery wasn't just one political issue among many. It was a deep, unresolved contradiction present from the exact moment the United States was founded. As the nation grew and expanded westward, the South's economic reliance on slavery clashed violently with the growing moral resistance in the North. And this irreconcilable conflict perfectly set the stage for the next monumental, tragic chapter in American history, the bloody descent into the Civil War. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shaped our